Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Lessons Learned and Best Practices for Transitioning Economies. I'm Brett Schwartz, Associate Director at the NATO Research Foundation. We are so happy to be bringing you this webinar today as part of the Nuclear Closure Communities Technical Assistance Program, which is funded by the U.S. Economic Development Administration. So this program is led by Smart Growth America with support from the Nuclear Decommissioning Collaborative, Center for Creative Land Recycling, and the NATO Research Foundation. And during today's webinar, you'll hear how two regions, one responding to the closure of coal-fired power plants and the other to the loss of the paper mill industry, have positioned themselves for economic recovery despite these setbacks. Both places engaged in early planning, forged deep and sustaining partnerships, pursued diversification strategies, and engaged with federal partners to support their efforts. These experiences can serve as examples to nuclear host communities, as well as other places that are responding to or preparing for major economic transition. So before I introduce today's panel of speakers, I want to share a few framing remarks about our assistance program and today's topic. So here's the broad mission of the Technical Assistance Program: to help communities and regions better prepare for a post-nuclear plant future by building capacity and providing technical assistance. You can visit the website listed on the screen to learn more, to connect with us. And we encourage any community that is home to a nuclear plant to reach out, whether that plant has been closed for a while or hasn't yet scheduled to at the moment. No matter where you are on the timeline, it's important to always be thinking about what lies ahead and how to better position your communities for the future. So here are some of the ways that we are providing assistance through this free program, through webinars like this one, a monthly newsletter, one came out just this morning, and also other information sharing activities. We provide focused technical assistance and support, and are really working on building a community of practice so that we can all learn from each other and lean on each other as you go through this process. So I'm not going to root through all the ways that we can help, but here are some of the areas that we are focusing on through this program. Understanding the decommissioning process, making connections to federal funding opportunities, engaging and coordinating with economic development districts in your planning efforts, and you'll hear more from staff at an EDD today as well. We can also provide support on enhancing the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, or CEDS, in your region to better reflect the challenges posed by plant closures, provide economic and fiscal analysis, placemaking strategies, and much more. So if any of these topics or themes seem applicable to your current efforts, or you think they will be in the future, please reach out to our team through the website, and we'll make sure to post that link in the chat as well. So we want to get a little bit of an idea of who's on the call with us so you can all hear from each other as well. So we have two polls that we'll be launching, and we'll launch the first poll right now. So take a moment or two here to discuss your connection to the nuclear power plants in your region. Choose the area that best represents your place in this space. And we'll keep it open for about 10 seconds. All right, so we'll close out in 3, 2, 1, and let's see what we got. All right, so we got a mix here. Looks like the highest from government at 65%, followed by community members, some from the industry, some advocates. This is great, really great to see so many from government on. We do have Supervisor Close from Michigan, who will be on the call today as well, so you have one of your peers to hear from. But good to see a mix here, and as you'll hear, it's really important to have everyone at the table, a variety of stakeholders working on this in tandem. So let's take it to the next slide. And our second poll will be popping up shortly. And for those of you who said you're representing government, please let us know which level of government you're working at. And we'll close that in 3, 2, 1. All right. So overwhelming majority here from federal, though of course some folks also at the state and local level, and some other as well. So we'd love to hear from you. Those of you at the other level, feel free to type in the chat box to let us know a little bit more about your role in your community. So thank you so much for doing those polls, and we'll get back to our slides here to continue. And again, let's make sure we can advance. Great. So thanks again for joining us today. And we do want to make sure this is interactive. If you do have any questions for the panelists or the speakers, feel free to use the questions box on the right side of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can at the end of the presentations. Question we always hear often is this being recorded, and will the slides be available? Absolutely. So we're keep an eye out for those in the next few days, and we'll make sure to get those to you. You can share with your colleagues or review again as well. And as I mentioned earlier, to learn more about our program, please visit the website here, and we're also going to make sure that that's provided in the chat box. Great. Okay, so Becca, if we could make this full screen here on the first mural page. And Becca, one more time, it's perfect. Thanks so much. So yeah, just moving on briefly, I really love public arts and murals, and wanted to showcase kind of two murals that I've seen and taken photos of from around the country that really kind of capture the spirit of the work that we're all doing. And this first photo is of a mural located right off of Main Street in downtown Gillette, Wyoming. So you can see here, change inspires creativity. This is a message that is particularly relevant to Wyoming, which is struggling with the downturn in the coal industry, and is likely a message that is relevant to your communities as well. So change is coming, and the way forward is to get creative, innovative, and explore the possibilities, not being tethered to a single strategy, industry, or way of thinking, which of course is easier said than done. But by having this mindset at the start, it helps to position your communities for long-term resilience and economic development. Now, this next mural is on a building on the side of a building in downtown Oakland, California. It's an image I often show at meetings and communities that are seeking to diversify and address their economic challenges. So simply stated, it's important to emphasize that no one is coming to save your communities. You are the ones you have been waiting for. The local community and its residents are the ones with the tools, the intellect, the expertise, and ultimately the personal stake in addressing the challenges that are on the horizon. So yes, there are outside resources, consultants, and funding streams that you can tap into, but ultimately the future of your community and your region is in the hands of those who live there. Now this may seem daunting, but really take comfort in knowing that there are many communities and regions all across the country, some of which we'll talk about today. They're also facing similar challenges and rising to the occasion, and we hope you can find strength in some of their stories and best practices that you'll hear about in a bit. So it's my pleasure now to introduce today's panel, who have a lot of interesting stories and examples to share with you. Really thrilled to be on this virtual stage with them today. First, we'll be hearing from Cindy Winland, my colleague, who is a consultant for the Nuclear Decommissioning Collaborative. Cindy will provide a helpful background on strategies for addressing transition, and also provide 3 distinct types of resources: a guide, some case study examples, and a framework for doing so. After Cindy, we'll hear from Terry Close, the supervisor in the Charter Township of Hampton, Michigan. Supervisor Close will discuss the impact of the closure and impending closure of coal-fired power plants in her community, and what steps are being taken to build partnerships, diversify the economy, and improve quality of life. And finally, we'll hear from Vicki Ruspel, who is the Director of Community and Business Services at the Eastern Maine Development Corporation in Bangor. Vicki will talk about her organization in supporting recovery and resilience after the decline of the paper mill industry in her region, and how EMDC is supporting with recovery through the creation of what they're calling economic opportunity response teams. So once again, we'll be running through our presentations. We'll be taking questions at the end, but feel free to type them in as they come to you. And looking forward to our discussion today. So with that, I'll turn things over to Cindy to kick us off. So Cindy, thanks so much.
Great, thanks a lot, Brett. We'll advance this one here. Okay, good, thanks a lot. Well, as Brett said, that we're here on a technical assistance team to help communities that are facing transition from nuclear closures. And the main message that I'd like to leave you with is planning early equals better outcomes. And we've learned this nationally, that this has been true, and in all kinds of industrial transitions. And you'll hear more about that, as Brett mentioned. So when we talk about planning, what do we mean? We mean to adopt a realistic mindset that decommissioning takes a very long time, often decades. And the type of impacts that will be felt in the community will happen at different times. So you start thinking about these and planning for those that you can anticipate. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There are some major categories of changes, and of course your community might see different ones. But we'll start with the financial ones, obviously the tax-based changes. And if you're able to put funds aside from a regular budget to address the needs, that would be really helpful, of course. But be prepared to take advantage of the federal funding that's available, probably your largest funding source for planning and infrastructure needs. It's important to be creative. Line up your governmental agencies, community foundations, academia, philanthropic players to contribute resources and expertise. So even if you're a small community, you don't have to have everything at your disposal right now. Knowing the impacts, though, how will your local tax revenues and expenditures be impacted, and how can we plan for that? So what else is going to change? Well, physically, for sure, you'll have a large former industrial site, some of which may or may not be usable in the future. It's important to know what decommissioning looks like, and those are the kinds of things that certainly we can show you. But in your community, what happens to traffic? Can any part of the site be reused? And what happens to spent fuel? All these questions are important to think about at the outset so that you can plan for the future, which, as we said, could be decades of change as decommissioning happens. So the economic impacts are direct, can be direct from loss of workers, loss of tax base, indirect, induced, all kinds of things. Questions that will come up in your community, and as a planner, these are things we deal with all the time. How does it impact the housing market? What does it do to school enrollment? Cultural issues. The plant and the employees are probably a part of the social fabric in the community. And they've contributed a lot, not only to things like the United Way, but to volunteer things, to sponsoring recreation, losing talent in general in a community. That can be pretty daunting. So starting to think about it now, even years in advance, is valuable. And so let's just look at a couple of the tools that are out there that we think are good examples as places to start. So first off, I'd like to draw attention to the blueprint from the Just Transition Fund. And this is a step-by-step guide for those who are just getting started or who have questions about specific stages in their planning work. So this can be useful whether you're starting from scratch and you haven't thought about it yet, or if you say, you know, here's where we are, we've done these things, now we're going to do X, we're going to assemble our stakeholders, we're going to look at funding, and often these things all happen concurrently. So as I mentioned, this is developed by the Just Transition Fund, and where I'm also a consultant. And so there's a lot of detail in this, and it's available on the Just Transition website. You can either download it, but the real resources come when you're on the website, and you can delve into each of them. So it comes with, let's look at one of those examples. Here we are. Whoops, we want to go back. And we want to go back. There we go. Here's one of the pages called Find Out the Facts. And it's just an example. It's a second level where it digs down into, well, what kinds of questions should we ask? Where might we find these answers? Are there any resources? Are there any case studies? And there's some pretty phenomenal things available through this that will help you start thinking about this. Now, this is written with coal communities in mind, but I would say that it's very transferable to any kind of industrial decline and probably pretty close to nuclear. So if you're a small community or you don't have enough staffing, we encourage you to contact the nuclear closing community project at Smart Growth America, because we can help you walk through some of these steps. So let's look at another example. This is from the Nuclear Decommissioning Collaborative, and this goes through some 5 basic stages that happen in a closing. There's a closure, there's an acknowledgement, and those kinds of things happen for a variety of reasons. We won't even go into that. There's some preliminary impact assessment, and you'll see some of the parallels to the blueprint we talked about before. There's the decommissioning learning curve, which is highly underrated in here. It's huge. There's and we won't have to go into all the detail about that, but there's the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that has very specific responsibilities and will stick with those. And then there's all the other things that happen with decommissioning in the community, and those are very much left up to the community. So it's really important to have partnership development, and then finally planning and execution, because whatever happens, we want to be able to act on this. And not all these things, you know, these are, as I mentioned with the blueprint, they can happen concurrently. It just depends on your specific situation. So let's look at some of these examples. This is from a document called, and linked to the bottom, the Socioeconomic Impacts from Nuclear Power Plant Closures and Decommissioning, from the Decommissioning Collaborative. And so some of these, here's some examples of that are detailed in that document about which communities are at which stage, just to give you a sense of that. So in closure acknowledgement, we'll point out the Southwest Michigan Planning Commission, who worked on a planning document and an EDA grant for funding for the Palisades Power Plant. And their objective was to implement a comprehensive economic recovery strategy for the benefit of Southwest Michigan in the wake of the upcoming closure of the nuclear power station. So pretty broad. To develop a sufficiently detailed understanding as to the integrated nature of nuclear power plants' contribution to the local economy. So those are some of the things that we talked about before, you know, the physical, the financial, the cultural. Then a sample of an impact assessment is Indian Point. They had an Indian Point task force. This is in New York State. They started 3 years before closure. And in their early work of the task force, they focused on issues pertaining to local taxes, employment, energy reliability, as well as decommissioning and site reuse. So remember, with energy reliability, not only the plants often are supplying the public, or they all are supplying the public, but they may also be supplying some private industry. And so one of the things that they looked at were the economic relationship between the Indian Point complex and the surrounding region. So they took a much more regional approach to this, which we'd encourage you to do. And then an example of partnership development. Well, here we don't want to gloss over the decommissioning learning curve, but as I mentioned earlier, there's very specific roles that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission takes on, and the others that the community is responsible for. So that's a pretty steep curve in a lot of communities, and we'd encourage you to delve further into this document, and you can read more about those kinds of things. And then finally, a good example with partnership development would be the Vermont Yankee Local Impacts Working Group. And they formed in conjunction with also a region. And they also partnered with an couple academic institutions in Vermont and Massachusetts, which we'd really encourage you to do, because there's often analytical and impact assessments that can be done through your local academic institution. And one of Vermont's early successes was increasing issue visibility regarding this. And so you'll know in a lot of places, it can be announced in 10 years and people say, that's too far in the future. But if you can raise the visibility of the importance of that, that can also help build those partnerships, help build those funding sources. Really, again, early planning equals better outcomes. And then for planning and execution, we'd lift up the Plymouth, Massachusetts example, where their town planning council and their regional development also engaged the University of Massachusetts at Amherst in their Center for Economic Development to assess the closure of the Pilgrim plant. And they have an interesting document that, if you're looking at what kinds of things come out of these assessments, they have their own socioeconomic analysis for closure and what they call their transition guidebook. So that's their marching orders. We learned these things, we're going to take these actions. And really importantly in this particular document is that it was not only marching orders, but the operational direction for the town select board. This is what we think needs to be done in the future. So that's really important to point out. So let's just look at a third example here. And this is taking a little bit different approach. So one, we had a step-by-step, we had some examples. This is something that's actually been put out by foundations called Two Tomorrows, Fund for Our Economic Future. And if you're looking at even a community, but even a region, there are other ways you can take a higher level, especially if you have time, to look at what are your priorities. Well, if they're generally job creation, but you can also look at things that how can we prepare people for the jobs so that we can provide some stability in our community. So there's obvious things in job creation. I won't read these off, but job preparation, that's really important. And we're finding that in industrial transition all across the country is that if people have skills that they're building as early as high school for in-demand jobs, that can help with the stability of the community, even though there's been a large, outflux or, a rupture, as a lot of people call that. So, and then finally, access, bringing jobs to people. And when we talk about that, that can be trying to bring in diversification and business retention, but also broadband, because when there's access to broadband, there's access to a whole different type of jobs. So this is more of a holistic transformation kind of look, but it's a good companion guide when you're thinking about the step-by-step approach, what did other people do in these case studies, and the really hard work about how are we going to make that happen. So with that, I will turn it over to Terry to talk about the Michigan example.
Thank you, Cindy. So I got to get my slides up there. There we go. I'm the supervisor, Terry Close, for Hampton Township. A little background about Hampton Township. We are, let's see here. No, I can't. There we go. A little too reactive here. Sorry about that. Hampton Township has a population of approximately 9,452 people and is located in Bay County, Michigan. I'm sure by this slide you can see why we call it the Mitten State, and where you see the yellow star, that is where 2 coal plants are and 1 fuel generation plant is located. By the time I became the Hampton Township Supervisor in 2017, we had already experienced the retirement of the Consumers Energy J.C. Weddock coal plant in 2016. It was located where you see the red circle. In 2017, they began to demolish this site, and it is nearly complete now. Also located at the same site, just above the red circle, are 2 yellow buildings. One is the coal plant, the D.E. Carn 1 and 2, and that is scheduled to retire in 2023. Next to that coal plant is a natural gas generation facility, Carn 3 and 4, and that has a scheduled retirement date of 2031. Once all of the plants are demolished, the property will become a brownfield, and we are told that Consumers plans to evaluate redevelopment options for the site. It's important to consider what the impact has, not just on your community, but on the region, the whole region as a whole. Before the planned closure of the coal plant, over 50% of our township's operating budget was from Consumers Energy, and that has dropped down to 23%. The county is also impacted by loss of tax revenue for the schools, the colleges, libraries, senior citizens, veterans, 911 dispatch, and so on. With the 2016 coal plant closure, there were 44 jobs lost. Overall, these closures will result in a total of 242 direct jobs lost in the community, and 21 indirect jobs lost, and 90 induced jobs lost. So this amounts to a loss of 71.6 million in expenditures also, and in the region, for the whole region, and 17.7 million in compensation. Those numbers were just staggering to me. Also, some of these employees may need to relocate to find other employment if they can't find anything here in our region. So how do we plan for a future without this large utility? We were very fortunate that Consumers Energy gave us advance notice of these closures because this afforded us an opportunity to be proactive and to plan for the future losses in revenue. But with that being said, the only thing that we've been able to do in the short term was to reduce our expenditures, which we have done and we are continuing to work on. What we also needed to do was to plan for the future tax revenue losses and the job losses, and we needed to look at ways to increase our tax revenue, replace what we were losing, create new living wage jobs, diversify our economy, and we need to begin to think and plan for alternative uses for the land that can be developed and market, and find new uses for our available empty buildings, such as a local mall. So I had to ask, how do we do this? Well, I didn't have the answer to that. And let's see here, I gotta advance my slide, sorry. I didn't have an answer to that. No one that I asked had an answer either. So when I learned that the Economic Development Administration, the EDA, was offering a grant for coal impacted communities, I got really excited because I thought, hey, this could really help our township. And through a contact person at Consumers Energy, Lynn Wilson, Public Affairs and Stakeholder Engagement Manager, I was introduced to Cindy Winland at the Just Transition Fund. And I learned how Just Transition Fund helps coal communities transition away from coal. Ultimately, after many discussions with consumers and Just Transition Fund, it was decided that what could really help our township was an economic redevelopment strategy plan, a roadmap on how we can accomplish economic diversification and plan for a future without Consumers Energy. This could help us move forward after the loss of our township's largest property tax generator, and could help our region because these closures impact more than just our community. In the beginning of the project, I was also introduced to Jane Fitzpatrick from the East Michigan Council of Government, or MCOG, and I learned how they assist economically distressed communities in the region and help formalize collaborative relationships among local and regional partners. This initial group of partners, Consumers Energy, Just Transition Fund, and MCOG, they were very instrumental in helping to create a grant application that could be competitive. They all collectively assisted me in writing and editing the grant narrative and the application itself. With my lack of experience in grant writing, I can't express how valuable a resource these people were to me. Just Transition Fund's technical assistance was not only instrumental in writing and editing, but also in providing the knowledge and expertise on where to go to obtain current data and information, as well as translating the federal speak and terminology into terms that I could understand. And they helped me to navigate the online application process, which was a bit challenging. I have to admit that going through the grant application process was pretty intimidating, since the grant funding is awarded on a competitive basis nationwide. Since the EDA had this grant and it had a 50% match, we also applied for additional grant monies through Consumers Energy and Just Transition Fund by working with our Bay Area Community Foundation, a nonprofit organization. And with the help of these partners, we were successful in obtaining not only the EDA grant for the coal impacted communities, but we also received $20,000 grant from Consumers Energy and $17,000 from Just Transition Fund. Ultimately, the EDA agreed to up the grant to $63,000 so that everything, including the match, was all met. These partners also assisted with writing the request for proposal that went out to consulting firms for the economic redevelopment strategy plan. So with that being said, we also formed a steering committee that included the ones I already mentioned, and it grew to include regional partners such as our Bay County Executive and Bay County's Director of Economic Development. It also included Bay Futures, an organization that facilitates economic development for our county, and the Bay Area Community Foundation that I mentioned, a nonprofit organization that helps people with causes and they obtain and maintain grants. We also included neighboring community leaders from Bay City and Essexville and Bangor Township, which are nearby. These individuals were all key in reviewing the consultants' proposals that were submitted and with the selection of the consulting firm that we ultimately hired. Once a consultant was selected, the steering committee further expanded to include other community members such as the superintendent of our public school district, the Chamber of Commerce, and some local business owners. The steering committee members assisted and provided input by reviewing the consultant's draft strategy plan and attending the steering committee meetings, which were in most part held virtually due to COVID. Another thing that we did that was important was that we engaged our community by providing an online survey that asked what they wanted the future of Hampton Township to look like. What was important to them? This was their opportunity to put their stamp on it and to make it ours. In August, the planning consultant that we hired presented virtually the strategy plan for economic success that is actionable both locally and regionally. And with the support of the county's economic development organization and the demands identified for land and industry in the area, we have been given a strategy that we hope will help us to attract new industry sectors and help to expand those that we have into regional hubs. Opportunities have been identified for new businesses and expanding businesses where significant spending leakage is currently taking place. Our redevelopment plan provides a potential industry sector opportunities that are currently underrepresented in Hampton Township. For us, one such industry is manufacturing. For instance, we are a large agricultural community, so the opportunity for food and beverage manufacturing concentrating around our agricultural activity, particularly commodity crop sales, offers an opportunity for increased food processing within our region. We also requested that our plan identify 5 potential properties for redevelopment, and the consultant put together site intelligence reports for each of these properties. And these site intelligence reports outlined property details, planning and zoning information, maps, uses, and site features and photos, so that everything needed and necessary to market these properties is there to be put on an economic development website for prospective investors, developers, or businesses that are interested in finding a location to meet their needs. So we understand that we're not going to be able to replace all the tax base that we'll lose with the closure of the plant in the near future. But we hope that we can bring new opportunities and diversification and rebuild the tax base. We also look forward to the days following the decommissioning and the sale of the Consumers Energy property, which will be sometime after 2031, that we will see another use for the property that adds to our community either recreationally, industrially, or in a way that we can't even envision yet. So what have we learned? First of all, I would recommend that you engage with your utility that is leaving, and that you understand the impacts that their leaving has on your community and region, and that you work together to plan for their departure. Our utility has been very good at agreeing to present updates by attending some of our local board meetings, so that both of our board members and communities are aware of what's happening. They've also provided the region with update meetings and tours So it's just not Hampton Township, but our neighboring communities. So that has really been great. Also, develop a plan, and the sooner the better. We've been very fortunate to have Consumers Energy work with Hampton Township to develop a 5-year plan that outlines the tax reductions for the upcoming 2023 plant closure. They did this with the Weddock plant closure that occurred in 2016, but this current tax reduction plan began in 2019 and it will go through 2024, even though the plant's closing in 2023. So after the demolition and the facility is all taken down, we will hopefully be right on track with the tax revenue that we're receiving that matches what the property should be assessed for. We plan to do the same thing in anticipation of the 2031 plant closure. And I can't stress enough that this is so important for budgeting purposes. Also, don't be afraid to reach out and solicit help anywhere that you can find it. I can't express enough the importance of working together and partnering with all the available resources that you can find in your area. Without Just Transition Fund and Consumers Energy, their generous contribution, their help, their knowledge, their expertise, their technical assistance, their willingness to be a partner from beginning to end, I can honestly say that I don't think that this project could have been possible. All the partners that I mentioned on our steering committee all brought something valuable to the table. And also look for funding opportunities. There may be federal grants or local grants available that can really help. Lastly, the best outcomes are community driven. So engage your community. Remember, for any plan to be successful, it's important that it's well received locally. So we here in Hampton Township are a work in progress. We are still learning valuable lessons, and hopefully learning about what we have done to date is helpful to others. I'm happy to say that in spite of the decreases in our tax revenue, we have made significant changes and reduced our expenditures. Only since 2018 have we been able to balance our budget and add to our fund balance, which we hadn't done since 2012. I would like to thank you for letting me share our story. And I apologize. Whoops. There we go. I apologize. Thank you very much for letting me share our story. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to get the slides always right.
That's great, Supervisor. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I think those two slides that showed all the partners and the steering committee, really drives home that this is a collaborative effort, and no community can go it alone, or no organization can go it alone. So thank you so much for that. So finally, we're going to turn to Vicki Rusbolt over in Eastern Maine to talk about their experience with the decline of the paper mill industry and the resources that they were able to pull together and the partnerships they built. So thanks for being here, Vicki.
Thank you, Brett, and good afternoon, everyone. As Brett said, I'm Vicki Rusbolt, and I work with Eastern Maine Development Corporation, which is one of 7 economic development districts in the state of Maine. We serve a 4-county region, which has very low population with very rural communities. Our largest community of Bangor has a population of close to 35,000. So we are very low populated rural region. 2014 and early 2015, I guess you could say they were banner years, but for all the wrong reasons. We experienced the loss of 5 out of 6 historical major employer paper mills in our region of the state. These paper mills had been operating for more than a century and had fits and starts in the last 20 years. And so people always kept the hope that they would remain open. They were very livable wage jobs. But unfortunately, with the downturn of the need for the amounts of paper with the advent of the internet and other impacts, we had 5 paper mills shut down. It should be noted that the 5 communities that these paper mills were located in The communities were essentially built around these mill sites early in the 1900s. And so the loss of these industries, these businesses, had a huge impact on the region. More than 1,500 direct jobs were lost. And that's the accumulation of all those paper mills in our area, but it also included, or add to that, are the loss of supply chain and small businesses that closed as a result of those paper mills shutting down. Even things like restaurants and hotels and other recreational businesses shut down because people weren't spending the money because they were unemployed. The community mill rates increased because of the loss of revenue, particularly from the closure of those businesses. There were a lot of homes in foreclosure. At one point, one of our communities had 75 houses that were abandoned or foreclosed on. And that has a huge impact on those communities. And it also resulted in a reduction of local services. And in some communities, they ended up sharing with a neighboring town because they couldn't afford to support those ongoing services locally. Another thing to think about that in our region of Maine is that employees were drawn from multiple communities and across the 4 counties that EMDC serves. And so the impacts weren't just to these 5 communities. I mean, there are more than bordering on 150 communities, some with a very small population, but driving an hour every day to go to work was not unheard of. And they were good paying jobs with wonderful benefits, and suddenly they were all gone. So in response to this loss, and all of these paper mills shut down within 6 to 8 months of each other. In response, EMDC was immediately able to partner with EDA on a short-term planning project that was performed over a period of 15 months. That project was started in the fall of 2014. And it involved strategic planning, it involved workforce planning, and it involved resiliency planning. And it was done on a regional basis because of the breadth of the impact. And it was administered, this project, in all 4 counties. So what were the inputs of that activity? We hired a consultant, Camoin Associates, to do a supply chain analysis and how we can best reuse that wood asset. It's still one of the major assets for the state of Maine, particularly our region of Maine, and we couldn't abandon that, but it's how do we find other uses for it. We performed an in-depth workforce analysis, and because EMDC is fortunate to have workforce development services embedded within our array of services, we were able to reach out to those displaced workers and start helping them find new employment. Many left the region to find other jobs. Many were employed in other areas, other areas of industry, I should say, and some opened up their own business, but some retired. We're an older state, and so people decided to take that opportunity to just retire and not worry about retraining or going out and finding a new position. We had community-based advisory committee meetings, and we had a very engaged number of stakeholders in all 4 counties representing all industries, from manufacturing to healthcare to tourism and many more. But we had these advisory committee meetings and had them in communities that had lost their paper mills, and invited people in the region that lived there to participate and attend the meeting to be able to give their thoughts and share their ideas or their issues. We did a survey and business interviews to about 120 different types of businesses to get a sense about what they saw as barriers, what they saw as opportunities, and even those weak signals or those opportunities that aren't really labeled a full opportunity but has the markings of being a direction that we could go for economic growth. We did roundtable sessions and brought industry experts to conversations in a couple of days, full days of roundtable conversations also talking about how can we share people that were trained in one industry that relates to another industry, and how do we all support each other. And then finally, we had community and public meetings. We had 2 very large meetings. Brett, using the poll earlier in this conversation, reminded me of how we used Poll Everywhere to go and get a sense of the audience. Both of those large public meetings had more than 120 people in attendance. And so we were able to get a broad sense of what people saw as opportunity and what they saw as those barriers that could keep us from feeling that opportunity. So these were some of the actions that came out of all the research that we did over a 15-month period of time. We recognized that we needed to have a new vision for our region, and that included diversity. We needed to build a resilient economy with a diverse number of economic opportunities and business supports without relying on just one industry like we had been in the past. We needed to be adaptable. We needed to be able to shift our priorities and our assets for other uses so that we could continue to grow this economic base. And then we needed to reach sustainability. It's becoming those resilient communities that does planning for the future, that thinks about where are we going to be 5 years from now, where are we going to be 10 years from now. We identified 6 economic sectors of impact that we saw real growth potential, and this was across the 4 counties. And I mentioned a few earlier. There was healthcare, there was tourism and hospitality, there was boat building, construction, and manufacturing. I'm blanking on a couple of education opportunities were there as well. So once we identified those sectors of impact, we started building partnerships at the federal level, the state level, the local government level, and with community businesses and residents. Those partnerships were instrumental to moving forward from a huge detrimental economic impact to one of growth and rebuilding. EDA again stepped in at this point and gave us another grant to help us implement some of those projects that we had identified through that planning, short-term planning process, and move them from a nugget of an idea to an actual project and develop that to one that would result in actual jobs. A big part of this was identification of the mill sites and how those could be rebuilt and reused for other purposes, including reuse of the wood product, but other purposes such as solar energy, data storage, sawmills. There were a lot of things that are out there now that people are talking about, different uses of the wood. And so identifying those sites for reuse has been critical to the growth. Not only will that result in new jobs where people can get employed again, but it also helps increase the revenue coming into the town so that their mill rates can start coming back down again. And it also increases, again, opportunities for supply chain, small businesses, and, as I said, jobs. It engaged a staff of workforce development folks that did hands-on, one-on-one counseling to find opportunities for the displaced workers to get additional training or to go and identify skills that help them get employed in other areas of business. And finally, it made us take a long, hard look at how we deliver economic development services to our communities and businesses and people. So this is where I think what Brett said at the onset of this panel conversation about change inspires creativity really fits in with what we did in Eastern Maine. We developed a concept called economic opportunity response teams. And so what this is a blending of the traditional services we've provided in the past, which has been business development, community development, and also workforce development. But then it expanded on that model so that we added additional services to that package. So we have site selection services, climate and community resiliency services. We do grants development and grants counseling services, just a broad array of new services that we weren't providing in the past. We also are providing services to businesses, second stage businesses that are looking for opportunities and ways to grow their business and do it in a smart and effective way. So our whole approach is not only adding to the service package that we can deliver, but it's also expanding that team so that we are all at the table from the beginning of the conversation. And that, you know, when you have such deep changes that we've experienced in our region, this doesn't change, we can't change what's happened overnight, obviously, but by finding a way to streamline the services that we provide, we can try to reduce the amount of time to get people back up on their feet and start seeing some economic growth. And so what EMDC has done has developed this model called Economic Opportunity Response Teams. And so when we meet with a community or a new business, we bring everybody to the very first conversation and have them at the table so we can talk about government contracts. We can talk about creating and developing new workforce and how we can find employees for those businesses that we're attracting to the region. We can talk about private investment and opportunity zones. And then just general business services, business planning. I mean, I think those are all pieces that we're all at the table at the same time. And so we can truncate the services that we provide and hopefully reduce the amount of the whole process. The other thing that's a little different about what we do is that we provide long-term intervention. It's not coming in just with one issue and then walking away. We're there for the long haul. So it could be 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. We're there as a continual resource and a service provider as the need arises to keep that economic growth going. So here's the listing of the new services that we provide. We have partnered in the past with Harvard Forestry to talk about development modeling. Community and climate resiliency are very key so that we're not only looking at how do we mitigate impacts from a changing climate, but also applying that concept to communities who are facing big changes like climate changes and how they can recover quickly. Economic gardening is the second stage of business support. We work with the University of Maine, primarily the Center for Sustainability Solutions, to do community facilitation and scenario analysis. You know, we do the deep research, we do what if ideas and conversations. We help with site selection for business attraction. We have provided emerging opportunity conferences in the past that kind of got curtailed during the COVID, but we've done some work online now through Zoom sessions to introduce those weak signals, those new opportunities that are just starting to grow and explaining it to a broader audience and how can they get in on that groundswell. And then, as I said, grants development, strategic planning, that was identified as a real weakness for the region. A lot of these communities are so small, they don't even have town managers. And so one thing that we can do is we can provide support to the community as they search for, find, and then submit applications to foundations and federal agencies. And in many cases, on some of the mill sites, we've actually done grant writing for them to provide that kind of service. So why is this different from traditional economic development services? It's proactive instead of reactive. We have the steps in place. We are ready to immediately respond when a business reaches out to us, or if we have an industry or a business that shuts down, particularly one that's a major employer. The services are community specific and they're project specific. And so we might have certain players at the table for one business that we don't have for the next one. We look to engage private and public investors and partners or stakeholders. They may be from that specific region, they may be from the broader region, but it would have insight to the difficulties this business is looking at. We create a targeted development roadmap, which provides an outline of who needs to be at the table, the steps and the aspects of the redevelopment that we need to look at and build a plan for. And we look at attracting and garnering new businesses to the region and finding a way to effectively show, that we can accommodate their needs, not only for space, location, utilities and infrastructure, but then the workforce. And finally, we also provide support to communities as they look at global issues that impact climate resiliency. We have a large number of communities that are on the coastline of the Atlantic Ocean, and even some that are a little more inland, but still have those impacts. And the threat of some climate changes, including the rising sea levels, are things that they need to think about now rather than waiting until there's that immediate need. And again, going back to the proactive instead of reactive. So to wrap up, I have a case study here for one of the mill sites in the town of Lincoln. So the project components included the creation of an opportunity zone fund, brownfields assessments. All of our properties needed to have that brownfields assessment done, phase 1 and 2 testing, to determine the amount of contamination. Some mill sites have more than others, and some mill sites have more contamination in one area of the site than another area of the site. We've talked about Maine Forest Products Training Center, business attraction, and the reuse of the wood product. And I should say that one of our partners has been the Maine Development Foundation, which also received investment from EDA to help the former mill sites rebuild and reuse of that property. And so we've engaged and communicated with them as well. So the EORT team has included community planning and resiliency, economic development planning, private investment, lending, site selection, grants development, government contracting, and workforce development, and including within the community planning are things such as zoning. And our lending department at EMDC is a community impact lender. So we look at creative ways to help them not only look for grants, but which are now very highly competitive, but also to look at loan packages that can be as competitive as possible and can help those businesses that may not have the best credit rating in the world. So all of this has gone into the Lincoln Mill site. The Lincoln Mill site is probably further advanced than any other mill site except for the mill site in Bucksport. But the development is growing and we can see this as ongoing projects, and we're applying this to other businesses and communities in our region. So it's great for good times and bad times, but we feel that our model is really critical to get out of an economic hole during the bad times. So thank you, Brett. I'll turn it back to you.
Excellent, Vicki. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I always learn something new from you every time I hear you speak. And I think the Economic Opportunity Response Team is a phenomenal model for regional development organizations or any other entities providing services, for the communities. So I hope folks can take a closer look at that. We have hit the top of the hour, but I hope we can stick around maybe for about 5-10 more minutes. We did have some questions come through from folks. So if Cindy and Supervisor Close could join us up here on the virtual stage here. We've got a few questions to run through, and there's actually 2 quick ones that I want to address quickly, and I'm really glad they came through. The first one was just asking about the technical assistance program, which you mentioned earlier. Is there a cost for this? And I probably should have mentioned that. Absolutely not. This is a free service funded generously through the U.S. Economic Development Administration for us to support you. So this is free of charge. It's really just your time and commitment to be a part of this, and I hope we can provide support in that way. There was another question that did come in about EDA funding, which I'm really glad this one came through. Folks were really interested to hear about the Assistance to Coal Communities project or program from EDA, and there was a question, is there something similar for nuclear host communities? And yes, absolutely there is. It's in a similar bucket of funding through EDA's Economic Adjustment Assistance program. It's called the Nuclear Closure Communities Fund or funding. And we on the support team here can help connect you with staff at EDA if you are interested in learning more about that and kind of walk you through the process, make sure those connections are made, because it's a really phenomenal opportunity no matter where you are on this timeline to be able to leverage some of these federal resources along with other resources to support your planning and implementation work. So thanks so much for those two questions that came through. And there were a few others that I want to get to. And one quickly, Vicki, for you, I think folks are really interested in hearing about the opportunity team and all the work that you're doing. And there was a question about staffing and capacity. It seems like you're doing a lot. They'd like to know a little bit more about size of your team, funding, how that works, and how you're able to do so much with a little.
So one thing I failed to mention is that we've worked very hard to tie in the work that we're doing to our SEDS plan for the region. And I think it's really important to do that when you have such a major impact to your region's economic health, that you need to address that in your SEDS plan. And so we have done that starting back in 2016. But I think, what was your question, Brett?
Just staff and capacity. How many of you are working on this?
Staffing.
Yeah.
So we have established departments here at EMDC that we have trained professionals that can step up to the table and provide assistance right out of the gate. When we don't have a capacity, we bring in folks from outside of our organization. So for example, for private investment in opportunity zones, we've hooked in with Dr. Brian Walton, who is a recognized national expert on opportunity zones and on private investment and building those relationships. And so we're not shy about bringing others to the table, whether they're within our organization or not. It's where we can find the appropriate capacity. We have been able to build. We've been going through kind of a growth period here at EMDC, and we have been able to build staffing, in particular by adding a full-time planner and adding a CARES Act individual through EDA. EDA keeps popping up. They've been our savior. But that position is funded for 2 years. That goes out and directly works with businesses, particularly those that have been really hard hit by either having to shut down because of the COVID-19, or they're struggling to stay open, or how can they adjust to all the state and federal requirements to remain open. And so we've got staff for that. But because we have so many departments within EMDC, we're able to pull in expertise on workforce, on lending, government contracting, things of that nature.
Great. And Vicki, a quick follow-up. There's a question came through about your partner on opportunity zones. Who was that?
Dr. Brian, B-R-I-E-N, Walton. He's done quite a bit of work with EDA and with FEMA, SBA, and also then locally in our region, but he's been across the country.
Great. Excellent. So I think the next question here is probably for all three of you. It's a big one, but an important one. And that is, how can you tell if you are on the right path? Do you have metrics or goals tied to timelines? How do you know things are moving in the right direction? So I'd love to hear maybe from each of you just a little bit about metrics and benchmarks and kind of keeping the accountability aspect of moving forward. So Cindy, I don't know if you want to start kind of maybe with what you've seen kind of the big picture.
Sure. Well, I think metrics are important where you can have them, but it's always good to have the goal. So I would say that some of the metrics that we encourage communities to start with are the financial ones. Is you can quantify what you're going to lose in terms of your revenues, and then of course what you're gaining, or what you're able to save, or what you're able to have economies of scale. So those are pretty easy. There's great metrics that can go with jobs, obviously. Again, losses, creation, retention, retraining, those sorts of things. And so if your goal is to try and create stability, and you've defined stability as we're going to offer the same services at some level, we're going to maintain our housing supply at the same ratio of rental to owner, or affordable to open market, those sorts of things, you can obviously track those kinds of things. And then the other thing that I would try to do is have some metrics around things that are a little bit harder to track, which would be things like social engagement. You know, before this started, who was engaged, and now have we added more people? Is it more inclusive? Do they represent more aspects of the community? Are they somewhere in the path to our final goal, which is to not have to roll up our sidewalks, to think about our new future? So, you know, we like people to have goals in the beginning, but so that you can measure against them. Honestly, most people will just start out with the math and work from there. But yeah, there's some pretty obvious metrics that are maintained.
And Terry, I'd love to hear from you as well, kind of your perspective and, you know, kind of being in government, kind of that accountability and communication, you know, with the public on where you're going.
Well, since we just got our economic redevelopment strategy plan presented to us in August, and we had the COVID hit, it's been very difficult for us to do anything to make progress, to really move forward. But some of the things, the items in the plan, one being, one recommendation for us would be like having 5G or fiber optics brought down our main highway, where we have some buildings that could be reused for other purposes, but they might, let's say a technology center, they might need to have that high-speed internet access. So one thing I'm trying to work on for that right now is trying to get maybe a broadband brought down, or the 5G network brought down. So there's things in there that I can kind of do right now to hopefully get things situated. But this has just been, like I said, a work in progress for us with this plan. I just feel so stifled as far as with COVID, what we can actually do to try to entice people to come here when our own businesses that we currently have are struggling. So I don't have a good answer to that, but I plan on continuing to work with our economic development organizations for our county and promote these businesses, and hopefully if we can create new jobs, we'll know how many we create, follow that. But I don't have a good answer right now.
And Brett, if I could just mention from my perspective, we do have goals. And I think, you know, there are some obvious goals like jobs created, businesses that have opened up, businesses that have expanded. We can track mill rates to see if those are starting to come down with business growth. But one of the things, I think that social engagement that Cindy mentioned is really important. So it's not only who's at the table and who comes to the table, but who stays at the table. If you're not doing anything and people view it as a waste of their time, they're going to start leaving. They're not going to continue participating. So there's got to be action. And I know one stakeholder from a local bank told me, enough with the planning, let's do something, let's have action. And I kind of took that to heart. And it's, you know, you've got to be continually, even if it's not a piece of action related to one community or one county, if there's action happening, the prospect of opportunity stays foremost in their minds. And so people, keeping them engaged for the long run is really important.
Great. And on a similar note, this is probably the last question today, but I think folks are really excited to see the partnerships that were developed, all those organizations and institutions and community members that are a part of this process. And the question here is about, you know, who should be the kind of backbone organization or the kind of quarterback through this process, and how do you kind of maintain that momentum? I know, Vic, you know, as an EDD, you kind of have that role kind of built in place. But any kind of, you know, recommendations, and of course it's unique to each community and region and what resources are there, but which type of organizations do you think are best suited to be able to kind of lead the charge and keep the momentum going, which I think is the hardest part of this, as it is such a long-term process?
Well, I'll tell you some of the characteristics that we look for, which are that they're a trusted party in the community, and that they have a neutral standpoint. And so, because then people will be willing to engage with them. And we've seen And when I say we, these are different industrial communities where I've worked, that it could be pretty logically like in Terry's position as the local government, or Vicky's position as the economic development arm. But we've also seen community foundations. I've even seen a Rotary Club take a lead role, and sometimes school superintendents. But a big point is identifying a group of community champions. One person doesn't have to do it all, and not everybody has to be involved for the whole time, depending on their expertise. So, because that's a big problem, capacity and leadership. Everybody has things they do, and to get somebody to commit and say, yeah, I'm going to lead this charge, and like in the case of a nuclear community for 10 years or 8 years or whatever it is, that's a lot. So, there's all the characteristics of champions we can talk about, but I wouldn't close your mind to who might be willing to step up to the table to get the process going, at least.
Great. Excellent. Well, I want to thank Vicki and Cindy and Terry for sticking overtime with us today, and for all of you for joining us. Really appreciate your stories and examples. This is a real enlightening hour together. And just again, want to encourage everyone on the call today to feel free to reach out to us and our team. We've got some links that were in the chat box, or for any of our speakers, we can certainly make those connections as well. But we'd love to hear from you, even if it's just kind of an intro chat, just to kind of get the conversation going, see where we are in the process, and make those connections. And kind of leverage all the resources that are out there. So many thanks again. Also, make sure to sign up for that newsletter, because that'll keep you up to date on all of the kind of webinars and resources and events that we will be working on through this program. As I mentioned, we just kicked this off very recently, so we're at the beginning, and really looking forward to ramping up and speaking with many of you throughout. So many thanks again to everyone for joining us. Stay in touch, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you on another webinar in the future. So thanks again.
Thank you, Brett.